This is Doug DeMuro, and today I am going to talk about an important reality that a lot of car enthusiasts don't want to admit to themselves, and that is modifications do not increase the value of your car. Yes, there are exceptions, but not as many exceptions as people who modify their cars would like to believe. And today I'm going to cover why modifications don't make your cars more valuable, and I'm also going to explain sometimes when modifications actually hurt the value of your car, and then I'll also cover the rare times when modifications do actually increase your value. So let's get started. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website with cool cars from the modern era. We've had some great sales recently on Cars and Bids, including this 2012 Porsche 911 991.1, which sold for just over $48,000. This 2004 Toyota Land Cruiser, one owner, modified for off-roading, which sold for just over $31,000. We've been a great place to sell 100 series Land Cruiser models, and this Mercedes-Benz Sprinter four-wheel drive sportsmobile, which sold for just under $100,000, sort of an off-the-grid four-wheel drive camper vehicle. Very cool. Cars and Bids has an amazing selection of cool cars from the modern era, the 1980s and up. So if you're looking to sell your cool modern enthusiast car or buy a cool modern enthusiast car, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. carsandbids.com. Okay, so let's get started. Now, the reason I am making this video is it's very simple. I do a lot of the reserve setting on Cars and Bids, my enthusiast car auction website. And people come, they submit their cars to us for sale, and several times a day, people will say, hey, look, I have a $30,000 car. I know it's 30, you know it's 30, we agree on that. I have $10,000 in modifications in the car, so I want a $40,000 reserve. I believe it's worth $40,000 now that I have a 30 grand car with 10 grand in mods, it's worth 40. And I'd like that to be my reserve price. Now, sometimes people actually will say, hey, I've got a $30,000 car with 10 grand in mods, so I think it's actually worth like $43,000 because the time to put the mods on should also be factored in. And so the car is worth even more than the car plus the mods because you gotta value my time. My time's not free. And so that's what my car is worth. Let me tell you the truth about modifications. They do not increase the value of your car like you think they do. Some modifications actually decrease the value of your car, which I'm going to cover, and very few modifications actually increase your value, or at least increase it significantly. And today, I'm going to cover basically why this is, which mods increase, which mods decrease, that sort of thing. So first off, I want to explain why modifications do not increase your car's value. Because I think this is a common issue that people seem not to understand. You have a car, you put money into it, modifying it, so now it should be worth more. But here's the deal. The simple truth is that not everyone wants to buy a car that has been modified precisely the way that you have modified it. So you put 10 grand in mods into a car, not everybody's gonna look at that and be like, yep, I would have done that, I would have done that, I would have done that. That car is exactly perfectly set up how I would have done it, so that's the car I would like to buy, and I'm gonna pay every penny for those modifications. It's very difficult to find someone who literally wants the exact modifications that you have put into your car. Now, this is particularly relevant for the people who have put lots of money into modifying their cars. Tens of thousands of dollars to make a Jeep Wrangler look a certain way, or 20 grand to do this or that to their Mustang, make it drive exactly how you want, look exactly how you want. With every dollar you spend in mods, you're decreasing the chance that you're gonna find someone who wants that exact modification on the car. And once you hit the $10,000, $20,000 modification threshold, it's just not gonna happen. You're just not gonna find that exact perfect person unless someone wants the exact seats that you put on and the exact wheels that you put on and the exact intake and like the grill the way you painted it and blah, blah, blah. Some of that stuff just doesn't benefit me as the buyer. If I'm looking to buy this car, it's like, oh, you put that on, I don't really need that. Well, I'm not gonna pay extra for it. And so people don't pay extra for it. And so people say to us, well, I have over $20,000 in this build, so I won't settle for anything less than $20,000 over the retail value of the car. But the truth is, most times people would just rather buy a stock unmodified car themselves and then modify it the way they want to, rather than buying a car that you've modified and taking all of your used modifications, some of which they wouldn't have even installed in the first place. No one's gonna wanna pay retail for mods that they wouldn't have even put on when they could just buy a stock example and modify it how they want. want to do it. And plus, think about when you installed those modifications, how you did it. It was little by little over time. You know, a few $100s there, maybe $1,000 there, whatever. It's not all at once. And so a lot of people would rather start with a stock unmodified car and do the same thing rather than pay up for this modified car way over what a normal one would cost. It's just not feasible for a lot of people to spend 40 grand on a Mustang that would be worth 20 grand unmodified. A lot of people would rather buy it for 20 and then modify it a little bit as they go, which is a lot more rational to most people's budgets. And there are other big reasons why modifications don't add value as well. One big reason, at least for me, is that people make assumptions about the way a modified car drives based on its modifications. You see a car that's been lowered with certain wheels or, you know, with certain tires, with an exhaust and other things, maybe a cage, you start thinking, okay, this person was drifting this car, this person was track driving this car or whatever. And even if the next owner also plans on track driving the car or drifting or whatever, you'd rather not buy someone else's car that's already been driven hard in a lot of different like autocrosses or track events, whatever. You'd rather just kind of get your own that's been untouched and then modify and upgrade it as you see fit. And so you look at mods and you think, yeah, I'm not really sure how that car has lived its life. I'd rather buy a nice one that I know is clean and then I can abuse it if I want. But that's a better way to go into it. So those are the basic reasons why modifications don't actually increase the value of your car like you think. Nobody wants to pay for your used mods and your car's been beaten on and pay all this premium when they could just kind of do it themselves over time. There are a lot of reasons. But I will say that modifications in general do add some value. You put 10 grand into a Mustang, you get maybe 2 grand of that back when you go to sell it in a few years, whatever. This is kind of a general rule of thumb. I don't know, could be 1, could be 3, depends on the modifications. But they do add some value in most cases, just not quite as much as a lot of mod people seem to think. And this is a big one. I have noticed that some modifications actually lower the value of cars. So some modifications, in addition to not increasing it, will actually actively harm the value of your cars. And I've started to especially notice this on cars that are becoming collectible and desirable. Just as an example, I will say this. I think if you are modifying an E39 BMW M5 or a Honda S2000 right now, you are probably actually lowering the value of your car unless you are doing some very specific and very desirable modifications. These cars are starting to make the shift from kind of used car that people would throw around and modify to a car that like collectors are starting to buy, serious people who actually want just a stock example, how they remember it from their childhood, that sort of thing. And people show up to buy an S2000 and they see one that's been lowered with black wheels and wrapped or whatever, and they're doing a calculation. You know, they buy an E39 M5, they're thinking, what would I have to spend to get this back to stock? And for a lot of people, they would rather just buy a stock example rather than pay money to get a modified example back. And so in those cars, in a lot of cases, I am starting to notice that mods are actually dropping the value of these cars, which is pretty crazy. Again, some modifications, even for E39 M5s and Honda S2000s, are still increasing and helping the value. But a lot of stuff you see on those cars that were put on when they weren't quite as valuable or desirable, people want them gone, and they're factoring in the cost to remove them when they're buying a car. And a lot of people would just rather pay more for a stock car so they don't have to do that, which is interesting. I mean, just think about it. Nobody paying like 50 grand for an E39 M5, which is what some of them are going for. Nobody paying that money wants like fake halo lights and coilovers and kind of weirdly painted black wheels. It's not what people spending 50 grand on an E39 M5 are looking for. They want the car, generally speaking, they want it to be stock. They want this like kind of showpiece special car. Whether or not that's a good thing for the collectible world and car world, blah, 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 we can debate all day. That's not the point. The point is we're talking about mods and value, and I think in some of those cases, modifications actually drop the value. Now, with that said, I do want to get on the last topic here, which is that there are modifications that actually increase value. Generally speaking, modifications will increase value a little bit, but not what you put in. However, some modifications you actually get pretty good amounts of money back from. Now, there are some specific examples of this. For instance, off-roading community. Most people in the off-roading community get similar modifications for their vehicles, and certain vehicles, 4Runners, Land Cruisers, are generally at this point going to off-roaders. So a modded car can actually increase the value more than you would think if it has sort of the right off-roading gear set up and hooked up to it. Suspension, lifts, tire carriers, steel bumpers, that sort of thing. They're not going to make dollar for dollar the money back usually, but you can get a lot more money back in the off-roading community with modifications than you generally can with the neon lights and coilovers community. Same deal also, another modification that increases value is reliability mods. Every car seems to have a couple things you want to do to it to preserve or improve the reliability, like rod bearings in an E60 M5 or the snap ring transmission thing in an NSX, blah, blah, blah. Everybody who's in the car world knows their particular car's little quirks. These modifications, when you do reliability mods, they certainly won't lose you value, and if they're expensive and desirable, some of them will certainly gain value. You go to sell the car and say, hey, this has been done. A lot of times people will pay more for that. And there's one other way that modifications can increase your value, and that is if they're really big and desirable modifications. On Cars and Bids, we've sold a couple of Ford Raptors with superchargers, aftermarket superchargers, and they add money. E46 M3s with aftermarket forced induction, that adds value. That is a really big change to the car. It's an expensive thing to do. It's difficult to do, and people who want more power out of these things are kind of looking for that. That sort of stuff, you won't get your money back out of them still, but you will get more than like a lowered suspension and some wheels, you know. Same deal if you have like a good full build. We recently sold on Cars and Bids an E38 7 Series with an M5 swap drivetrain, and it brought huge money, like $28,000, because it was a great like full build, well done, extremely well executed, and obviously that kind of thing gets you money too. Again, I suspect they didn't get out what they put in, but they got a lot more than a regular E38 7 Series would have. But the simple truth is, with modifications, if you want to get your money back out of mods, if you want to maximize your money out of mods, the best way to do that is to sell the modifications individually, to take them all off the car one by one and sell them individually, because in the modification world, they're still very desirable. Some stuff less desirable if it's been used, obviously, but a lot of times this is the best way to do it. Now, it's time consuming to do it this way, and you have to still have the stock parts. You can't swap out your modded seats if you don't have the old ones to put back in. But if you do this is how you increase the value for your modifications. A lot of people don't want to do it. They just want to sell their car and move on. And in that sense, they should be ready to take a pretty big hit on their mods. But if you actually want to spend the time and get as much money back as possible, that is the way to do it. Obviously, it's a lot of work, but it will maximize your return. And your return won't be maximized if you sell the car with your mods on there. So there you go, modifications. They do not get you more money when you go to sell your used car. Maybe a little more money, but not as much money as car modification people seem to think. You don't put 10 grand into your car and then it's suddenly worth 10 grand more. It doesn't work that way, and there's a little explanation of why.